Jason Chandler sat on the couch and stared at his phone. It wasn't long before he received a disturbing call from Karen, his wife of almost 10 years. Earlier that day, the private investigator had informed him that she and her lover had just boarded a flight to Honolulu. He knew they were planning to spend a week there, though that was not what she had told him. It was the latest in a string of lies and poor decisions on her part. He wondered how he could have been so stupid and blind. For almost 10 years, he had given everything he had to build a life with Karen, but now it was all gone. He took another sip of coffee and leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. He reflected on the last decade. He had met Karen in college 13 years ago. They were both getting business degrees and were in the same study group. This had led to them starting to date. They eventually fell in love and married after graduating from college. He went to work for his father, who owned a chain of successful tire stores across the state. He always worked for his father, spending summers at one of the many stores his father owned. Sometimes he worked in the store replacing tires and brakes. Sometimes he moonlighted as a courier, delivering tires and parts to local stores. As a result, he learned a lot about the business. After graduating from college, his father talked him into working at the company's headquarters in the accounting department. Over the years, Jason had proven himself capable of handling any task and was now the head of the accounting department, working directly for Mike Allen, the CFO, who was due to retire in a couple years. And Jason knew that his father had dreamed of handing the company over to him when he retired, and realized that when Mike retired, he would get a promotion and take his place. Karen, meanwhile, took a job as a realtor. After they were married, she went to school and got her license to sell real estate. She was damn good at what she did, and made good money even during the toughest years when things were bad in the market. They had a good life, so he thought. They'd saved and saved and saved, and they'd managed to buy a nice house in the suburbs. They each drove a nice new car, and from the looks of it, their marriage was secure. They didn't have children, and that bothered him more than it bothered her. Now he considered it a sort of blessing in disguise. At first, Karen had said there was something wrong with her tubes, and that was why she had them tied. He consoled her and suggested she consider adoption, but Karen rejected the idea. He eventually resigned himself to the fact that they would never have children. But over the past year, several things had happened that made him think something was happening, something that would change his relationship with Karen forever. For starters, Karen started spending more time with the girls than ever before. He never denied her free time because he knew how stressful her job was. But the bi-weekly happy hours that used to last until 7 in the evening began to be 2 or 3 times a week, and depending on the day of the week, she could get home no earlier than midnight or later. Jason wasn't thrilled about this and expressed his displeasure, but she brushed it off, saying she was under a lot of stress at work and deserved time to blow off steam. "What are you doing until midnight?" he asked her one night when she came home with disheveled hair and clothes that smelled like cigarette smoke. "Oh, we just drink," she replied. "Sometimes we dance if we're in the mood. Look, Jace, it's none of your business. I'm a big girl and I don't need you telling me what to do. So back off, okay?" Jason stared at her in shock. She had never spoken to him like that before. Seeing the look on his face, she softened. "I'm sorry, Jace," she said. "I didn't mean to snap at you, it's just that we're under pressure from the market." "You've been through tough times in the market before, and it didn't bother you," he said. "What's different this time?" "You have no idea how hard it can be sometimes," she said. "The competition is getting worse and worse, and upper management is putting more and more pressure on us to sell real estate." "I understand that, honey," he told her. "But there's no need to take your anger out on me. I'm on your side, remember?" She smiled and hugged him. "You're right, darling," she said. "Please accept my apology." "Okay, I agree," he said. "But please take a shower or something. No offense, but you smell like an ashtray." "I'm sorry," she said. "There were a lot of people smoking in the club. I'm going to go take a shower." He lay down and was already asleep when she got to the bed. Over the next few months, other changes occurred. The frequency of their sex decreased dramatically. Before all this started, they were making love 3 or 4 times a week. Then that dropped to twice a week, and eventually, if he was lucky, to once every 2 weeks. Worse, her attitude toward him seemed to have changed. Before, she had always asked about his work and was interested in his hobbies. Now she didn't seem to care what he had to say. And then there was the day he caught her in a blatant lie. One day he decided to stop by her office to ask her to lunch. However, when he got there, He was told that she had left to show some real estate. In the evening, when Karen came home after what she had been doing with the girls, he asked her how her day had been. "I was in the office all day today," she replied. "I had a lot of paperwork to do, so I just grabbed a sandwich from the vending machine." Jason was shocked. She had just lied to him with an honest face. As far as he knew, this was the first time she'd ever done that. He considered pressing her, but decided to refrain. She would probably explode in this state, and he was too tired to fight it. He wondered how many more times she had lied to him. Later that night, as they lay in bed, he rolled over and looked at her. She saw the worry on his face. "What's wrong, Jace?" she asked. "I'm worried," he replied. "With what?" she asked. "Us," he said. "I feel like we're drifting apart. Do you still love me?" "Of course I do, honey," she said, hugging him. "You know that, don't you?" "Honestly, I don't know," he said. "I can't remember the last time you told me that, and we haven't had sex in a long time. You seem to go out more often than you're home." "I'm sorry," she said. "It's just the pressure of work. I really love you. Please believe me." "Can you start showing me more?" he asked. "Of course, baby," she replied, kissing his face. They made love that night, and Jason felt better, but he was still bothered by the problems. For about a month, things went on as normal, but then it happened again. "What the hell is going on?" he asked himself for the 1,000th time. He began to realize what was going on the day his longtime friend Ron Green called him and asked if he could get away for a while. "Sure, I can meet you for a beer," Jason replied. "What's going on?" "I really can't say over the phone, Jason," Ron said, "but it's important." "Okay," Jason said. "I'll meet you there at 5:30, if I can make it." They ended the conversation, and Jason met Ron at the bar that evening. Jason wasn't too worried about being late, since Karen almost always left before 6 or 7 in the evening, and sometimes later. "Okay, buddy," Jason said, sipping his beer. "Spill it. What's going on?" "Jace," Ron began, "I saw your wife today when I went out for a run." "Yeah?" Jason asked. "She's selling real estate, probably walking around showing real estate." "I'm sure she does," said Ron. "But I never knew selling real estate involved kissing and holding hands." "What?" Jason asked. "Oh, come on, you're pulling my leg." "I wish I was, buddy," he said. "I was driving down Riverside Drive and I saw your wife coming out of the house with some man. They were holding hands and then they kissed. I'm not talking about kissing her on the cheek." At the same time, he ran his hands over her ass. "That can't be," Jason said. "Are you sure you're talking about my Karen?" Ron pulled out his cell phone and showed Jason a picture. Sure enough, it was Karen, making out with a man who had his hands on her ass. "Holy shit," Jason said quietly, handing the phone back. "Can you email me that picture?" "Sure," Ron said, pressing some buttons on his phone. "And what are you going to do?" Jason shook his head. "I don't know, buddy," he said. "It's been a while since I've seen her, but I never thought she'd do something like this." "My friend is a private investigator," Ron said. "If you want, I can put you in touch with him." "Do that," Jason said. "I need to know what the hell is going on." They said goodbye and walked out the door. When he got home, Karen was in the kitchen. "This is new," he thought to himself. "You're back early," he said, kissing her. "I'm not complaining, by the way." She smiled and kissed him back. "Where have you been?" she asked. "I was downstairs having a beer with Ron," he replied. "I didn't expect you back so early, so I thought I'd see what's up." "Is everything okay with your friend?" she asked. "Not really," Jason replied. "He just found out that his friend's wife is running after her husband." "Oh?" she asked. "Yeah," Jason said. "He saw her kissing and holding hands with some guy today." Jason thought he saw her flinch slightly. "Well," she said, "maybe he's putting too much importance on it." "I don't know," Jason said. "I'm just glad I don't have that problem." Again, he thought she flinched slightly at that remark. "It would kill me if you ever did something like that to me." "I would never do that to you," she said, wrapping her arms around him. "I love you too much." "I'm glad to hear you say that," he told her, kissing her sweet face. "So why are you home so early?" "Our company's annual convention is this weekend, so I decided to start packing and wanted to spend the next night or two with you since we'll be apart for a few days," she said. "It's being held in Las Vegas this year." "Where?" he asked. At the convention center, she said. We're all staying at the Westgate Resort Hotel. I've heard it's a 4-star hotel. When are you leaving? He asked. Friday, just after lunch, she replied. It was the day after tomorrow. Did you get another award this year? He asked. She always got awards for being the best salesperson in the region. I think so, she replied. They kissed again. Then, he said to her, why don't I walk you upstairs and congratulate you on another successful year? She smiled and took his hand. I thought you'd never ask, she said. They spent the evening making love, but Jason was preoccupied with other thoughts. Would she cheat on him this weekend? He asked himself. Say I have a vacation coming up, he said. Why don't I take a few days and come with you? Maybe we'll spend a week in Vegas, relax a little, and rebuild our relationship. After all, next week will be our 10th anniversary. Sounds like fun, she said, but I'll be so busy with seminars and meetings that it's unlikely we'll get to see each other. Besides, they expect me to go right back to work after the convention. Look, why don't we celebrate our anniversary when I get back? I'll make it up to you, I promise. Good, he said. I'll keep you posted. The next day, he contacted Ron and got the name and number of the private investigator. He made an appointment for that day and got there before lunch. Good morning, Mr. Chandler, the middle-aged man said as Jason entered his cluttered office. Nice to meet you. Ron said you could call. Please call me Jerry. What can I do for you? Jason explained the situation and talked about Karen's upcoming trip to Las Vegas. Vegas, huh? Jerry asked. Do you think she intends to hook up with someone at the convention? I don't know, said Jason. Maybe. I have some acquaintances there who should do me a couple favors, said Jerry. Tell you what, we'll keep an eye on her there, and if you want, we can sneak a camera and microphone in if you give me her room number. It'll cost extra, you know that. That's what I thought, Jason said, but I need to know the truth. Jerry pulled out a digital audio recorder and held it out to him. It's very easy to use, Jerry said. It's voice-controlled, so all you have to do is put it under the car seat and turn it on. You can retrieve it later when she drives away. I assume she'll leave the car at the airport. She usually does, Jason said. Good, Jerry said. Don't worry, we've got it covered. If she messes up, we'll take care of it. By the way, here's my private number in case you hear anything. Call me anytime. Thanks, Jason said, writing a check from his personal account instead of the joint account. Both he and Karen had their own personal accounts, separate from the joint checking account used to pay bills. They had agreed to this years ago, promising to set aside no more than 10% of their net earnings. So far, Jason had spent the money on clothes, change, and gifts for Karen. He had been saving for the cruise, but now he was going to spend it on something else. In the evening, Karen finished packing for the trip. Jason offered to carry her things to the car, and she gladly agreed. That would be very helpful, she said, and kissed him. He carried the bags to her car and put them in the trunk. He couldn't help but notice how much stuff she had packed. It was more than enough for a weekend trip. Putting her overnight bag in the trunk, he couldn't resist the urge to see what she had taken and opened the suitcase. He immediately noticed the package of birth control pills. There were only 10 left in the container. What the hell? He asked himself. Where did she get birth control pills? Hadn't she said she'd had her tubes tied? Or was that another lie? He looked at the clothes she'd packed. Some of what she'd brought with her seemed appropriate for a business meeting, but most of it turned out to be clubwear. Tiny dresses he'd never seen before, and lingerie with ruffles. He also noticed a couple of very revealing bikinis, one of which turned out to be an open micro bikini that he'd only seen online. He pulled out his phone and took pictures. Opening her car door, he slid the audio recorder under the seat and made sure it was on. Then he closed the car doors and made sure everything was locked. This night was the last time they would make love, Jason thought, probably as husband and wife. The next morning at breakfast, Karen gave him her room number and promised to call him every night. I love you, she told him, kissing his cheek. I love you too, he replied. He watched her drive away from the house. When he arrived at work, he called Jerry and gave him her room number. Great, Jerry said. Thanks, I'll take care of my guys. In the afternoon, he received a call from Karen informing him that she was at the airport and getting ready for her flight. I'll call you when I'm checked into my room, she said. I'd appreciate it, he said. Remember, I love you. I love you too, baby, she said. I'll miss you. Of course you will, you lying bitch, he thought to himself sarcastically. I miss you too, he said instead. As he finished speaking, he looked up and saw his father standing in the doorway. Everything okay, son? He asked. You look like your dog just died. I don't know, Dad, Jason replied. His father strode into the study and closed the door. Everything okay at home? Do you want to talk about it? His father asked. Jason knew it was best not to try to hide anything from his dad, so he told him everything he knew so far. That doesn't sound too good, son, his father said. I would never suspect her of cheating on you. Me neither, Dad, Jason said. If Mom and I can help in any way, let me know, the older man said. We're here for you. Thanks, Dad, Jason said. I appreciate it. Jason left a couple hours early and drove to the airport looking for Karen's car. He found it in the short-term parking lot and pulled out the audio recorder. Looking around, he noticed that the car was otherwise neat as a pin as she always kept it. On the way home, he got a call from Karen. Hey, babe, she said. Just wanted to let you know I got here okay. Thanks for letting me know, he replied. I'm just getting settled in, she added. I'll call you tonight. Love you. Love you too, he replied. Back at home, he turned on the audio recorder. He hoped there wouldn't be anything on it, and for the most part there was nothing but road noise and the sound of her radio. About halfway through the recording, however, he heard his marriage rolling down the toilet. He could hear her phone ringing, and since it was connected to her car via Bluetooth and working through the speakers, he could hear both sides of the conversation. Hey, baby, he heard a male voice say. Hey, stud, she replied. Stallion, Jason asked himself, what kind of clown was this? I can't wait to see you again, the man said. Last week was absolutely amazing. I'm glad you approve of that, she giggled. Do we have a deal for next week? Next week? Jason asked, shocked. It's settled, the man said. Have you told your husband? Not yet, she replied. Don't worry, honey. I've got everything under control. He doesn't suspect anything, does he? The man asked. Nothing, she replied. He doesn't realize anything as usual. I hope you're right, he said. I told you not to worry, she said. He'll believe anything I tell him. Good, the man said. Look, I'm ready to pull up to the airport now, she said. I'll see you at the hotel tonight, okay? I can't wait, he said. Bye, love. Bye-bye, she said, ending the conversation. Jason stared at the recorder, unable to believe what he had just heard. He listened to the tape again to make sure he hadn't taken anything out of context. Not only was she cheating on him, but she was planning something for next week, the week of their 10th anniversary, and it didn't involve him. Damn it. Damn, 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 he thought to himself. How long is this shit going to last? And who is this asshole she's having fun with? He grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat down at his desk, reflecting on the last few months. Had he really been so clueless that he'd missed all the signs? He wondered what else she might be hiding. Up until now, he had always respected her privacy and stayed out of her personal affairs, but now that had become impossible. He knew she kept her home desk under lock and key, but he also knew where she kept the key. He went to their bedroom and opened a small drawer in the jewelry box. The key to the desk was on a ring along with several other keys. He took the ring and went to the bedroom they had set up as her office. He opened the desk and began looking through her papers. Normally, he would never have done this, but after she had betrayed their marriage vows, he felt she was no longer worthy of attention. What he discovered shook him to the core. It turned out that Karen had lied to him throughout their marriage. He pulled out the folder where she kept her bank records and was shocked to see how much she was saving from her paycheck. He knew how much she was putting into their joint account and was shocked to see that she was putting far more than the agreed-upon 10% into her personal account, which now held over $250,000. Reviewing her purchases over the past few months, he saw that among other gifts, she had purchased a very expensive men's Rolex watch, undoubtedly for her lover, as she had never given him anything so extravagant. She also bought a lot of expensive clothes online, including some revealing Victoria's Secret pieces. Of course, he hadn't seen any of this, but that wasn't all, much more. He also found medical bills from the Planned Parenthood clinic. Apparently, she had managed to get pregnant twice in the last 2 years and had gone in for an abortion. Both times, she had paid cash from her account. He wondered if one or both of the children she aborted were really his. He also saw that she had been paying regularly for birth control pills for at least the past 4 years. Worse, he found a check for the Plan B pills used the morning after the birth. Judging by the date on the receipt, Karen had bought them earlier that week. And that wasn't all. Among her checks was a very recent one for a large down payment on a condo in a fairly affluent area of town. He wondered if it would be her love nest or part of her exit strategy from her marriage. There were also receipts for utilities and new furniture. He looked at the ring of keys he'd found earlier and wondered if one of them was the key to her apartment. He intended to find out. He turned on her computer to see what he could get out of it. He knew she always wrote down her passwords and found a piece of paper taped to the bottom of the keyboard with a list of usernames and passwords written on it. He tried entering the first of them, and sure enough, the computer immediately started up. Opening his browser, he found a link to an email program and logged in. Sure enough, the email client immediately opened and showed her mailbox. Apparently, she was so confident that he would never spy on her that she had saved her username and password in the system. He started checking her email and was shocked at what he found. There were several emails there, sent to and from Greg Wilson. Almost all of the emails were explicit, Greg talking about how much he enjoyed having sex with Karen. Her replies were about the same. He noticed that the letters had been sent almost a full year ago, around the time he had first noticed the changes in her. As far as he could tell, at first the dates had been in hotel rooms, but then they had decided to meet in houses she was selling. He found a letter sent about 6 months ago that gave a partial answer to one of his questions. "Did you get that little problem sorted out?" Greg asked. "Yes," replied Karen. "I went and got an abortion today." "Too bad you didn't keep it," said Greg. "You could have passed him off to Jason." "I can't do that," she replied. "As far as he knows, I can't have children. He'd realize it wasn't his." Jason thought back to 6 months ago and realized that was when he'd first caught her in a lie. Bitch, he thought to himself. Lying, conniving, cheating bitch. He kept going through their emails. At one point, Greg suggested they have sex in Karen's marital bed, but she didn't agree. "I won't do it with Jason," she wrote him in one of her emails. "Come on," Greg wrote back. "That stupid asshole has no idea what's going on." "No," she wrote back. "I'm not going to do that." "What if you had your own apartment?" Greg asked. "You could pay cash for a nice apartment with the commissions you get, and your husband would never notice the difference." "You may be right about something," she wrote back. "I have my own account and Jason never asks about it. I'll see what's available now." That was 3 months ago. The receipt for the down payment was dated just over a month ago. "I bought a condo," she informed him in an email. "I just made a down payment and I'm getting new furniture in a week. Jason doesn't know anything about it." "Great," Greg wrote back. "We'll have to christen every room in this house." Jason leaned back in his chair, shocked by this revelation. He continued to look through the emails. "So why are you staying with your husband?" Greg asked. "Why not just leave him and move into an apartment?" "Believe it or not, I still have feelings for him," said Karen. "Even though he's an arrogant accountant at a chain of tire stores, I like him, and he treats me well. I only bought the apartment so we could have a place to hook up without risking being seen at the hotel. Besides, you're still married." "Look, babe, just say the word and I'll dump Christy in a heartbeat," Greg wrote back. "She's a royal pain in the ass as it is." "We'll see what happens after the conference," she wrote back. After the conference? What happens after the conference? He asked himself. Jason started to print out her letters and copy the receipts he'd found when the phone rang. Karen's number popped up on the display. "Hello?" he said, picking up the phone. "It's me, baby," Karen said. "Are you okay? You don't seem to be yourself." "I have a splitting headache," he said, not wanting to let her know he'd gotten to her. "Well, I just wanted to let you know I'm settling in for the night," she said. "Take something for your headache and get some rest. I love you and miss you," she said. "Yeah, me too," he said. "Goodbye." He ended the conversation wondering if she had noticed that he hadn't said he loved her or missed her. Truth be told, he was close to punching a hole in the wall. He decided to find out who this Greg guy was and started looking him up on the website of the company Karen worked for. Sure enough, he found him. Greg Wilson, the website said, is the regional manager of the real estate company Karen works for. In other words, she was having fun with her boss. He printed out the page and put it in a stack of his stuff. Unable to calm down, he decided to see if he could break into her apartment. He checked the address, but he wondered if she had a security system installed. He looked at her paperwork and found a series of numbers next to the word alarm system on it. Of course she'll write it down, he thought to himself. She records everything. He closed her computer and walked out, stopping in the garage to grab a pair of latex gloves. He didn't want to leave any trace of his being here. He found the complex easily and parked in her assigned spot. As he approached the door, he put on the gloves and tried one of the keys on the ring he found in her jewelry box. The door opened and he stepped inside. Seeing the remote for the alarm system on the wall next to the door, he entered the code he found in her papers and made sure the alarm was disabled. Turning on the light, he looked around the apartment and was amazed at the way Karen had picked out the furniture. She always had good taste, he thought. Too bad she wasn't as loyal in her choice of colors. Of course, there were no pictures of him here. He hadn't expected to see any, though, after all. This was her love nest, her escape from their marriage. Walking into the kitchen, he noticed that she even had a few plates and silverware. There was nothing in the refrigerator and the pantry seemed just as deserted. He was somewhat surprised to see that the house was fully furnished, decorated with portraits with flowers. A large flat-screen television hung on the wall. He made his way to the bedroom and noticed that it too was fully furnished, with long lace curtains hanging from the windows, reaching all the way to the floor. She adored lace curtains and had hung them all over the house. When he looked down, he couldn't help but notice that they hung directly over the electric heater. He shook his head, wondering if Karen had thought of the potential fire hazard. Opening the drawers of the dresser, he found underwear he'd never seen before, as well as men's underwear that he suspected belonged to Greg. He pulled out his cell phone and took pictures. In the drawer of her nightstand, he also found a postcard addressed to Karen. Opening it, he saw it was from Greg. "Just wanted to say thanks for the watch," the card said. "Looking forward to your housewarming party. Signed, Love, Greg." He felt like ripping off Greg's arm and destroying his cheating wife with it. In the walk-in closet, he found even more clothes, both men's and women's, on hangers. In the master bath, he couldn't help but notice 2 toothbrushes hanging over the sink and towels for him and for her on a rack next to the shower. He pulled out his phone and took a few more pictures. The second bedroom had only a small desk and a chair. On the desk was a network cable that she apparently used for her laptop. On the desk were several letters addressed to her. They were all from utility companies. He photographed them, making sure her name and address were clearly visible in the pictures. The windows here, too, were covered with long lace curtains that fell to the floor. Like the bedroom, they too were drawn down in front of the electric heater. Looking around, he noticed a few more things that could be called fire hazards or safety hazards. For example, there were no smoke detectors in the bedrooms, and the one hanging from the kitchen ceiling looked very old. He wondered if it had a battery in it. After making sure it was okay, he turned off the lights, activated the security system, and walked out of the house, making sure the door was locked. He walked back to his car and headed home, mulling over his options. Divorce was the right decision for him. Even if she got rid of the apartment and broke up with her lover, he would never be able to trust her again. He also knew that financially, men were often the losers. He knew from her financial records that she made much more than he did, and hoped that would be enough to avoid alimony. He decided to wait until he talked to an attorney before taking any action. He also hoped that the fact that she had already bought the condo in her name meant that he wouldn't have to give her the house or sell it and give her half of the proceeds. In his opinion, she had abandoned him by buying the apartment and not telling him anything. They had no children, so child support and custody were not an issue. But he wanted these 2 crooks to pay for what they had done. Violence was out of the question because he didn't want to go to jail. Back home, he looked in the phone book and found an ad looking for Gregory Wilson. He hoped it was the same Greg Wilson and dialed the number. "Wilson residence," a woman's voice answered. "Is this Mrs. Wilson?" he asked. "Yes, this is her," the woman replied. "Who am I talking to?" "My name is Jason Chandler. Is your husband the regional manager of Acme Real Estate?" Jason asked. "Yes, he is," replied the woman. "But he's away at a conference this weekend and will be visiting other offices next week. You'll have to call the regional office and leave a message for him." "Actually, Mrs. Wilson, you're the one I'd like to talk to," Jason said. "Oh?" she asked. Yes, ma'am, Jason said. I hate to tell you this, but my wife is having an affair with your husband. Are you sure about that? She asked. Yes, I'm sure, Jason said, and I can prove it. You have ironclad proof of that? She asked. I can even show you where they get together if you want, Jason said. He heard her sigh over the phone. Is tomorrow going to be okay? She asked. Sure, Jason replied. What time would be more convenient for you? Make it around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, she said. He gave her the address and directions to Karen's apartment. I'll see you there, Jason told her, ending the conversation. Smiling, he walked over to his desk and started making a to-do list. The first thing he decided was to change the locks on the doors. He would have time to do that before he met Greg's wife at Karen's apartment. He thought about getting drunk that night, but put the idea out of his mind. Instead, he took a slice of cold pizza and ate it, thinking through all the options. Once he was done with the pizza, he climbed the stairs and went to bed. The next day, he got up early and went to the local hardware store where he bought everything he needed to change the door locks. He also made another key for the apartment. By noon, he had changed all the locks. He took a shower and, grabbing his audio recorder and all the emails he had printed from Karen's account, went to her apartment to meet Greg's wife. As he stopped in front of Karen's car, he noticed an attractive dark-haired woman in a Toyota Corolla nearby. He approached the car and knocked on the window. She rolled down the window and looked up at him. Are you Christy Wilson? He asked. She nodded her head. Yes, she said. And you must be Jason Chandler. Same here, he said, opening the door in front of her. Come with me, and I'll show you their love nest. Just put these on first, he added, handing her a pair of latex gloves. I don't want to leave fingerprints. Good idea, she said. They walked to her door and Jason opened it with a key he'd made himself. He was glad it worked. Turning off the security alarm, they went inside. Jason led her into the bedroom, opening drawers and the closet so she could see Greg's clothes. Oh my God, she said. I've been looking for this stuff for the last couple weeks. I was wondering where his clothes were disappearing to. Has your husband been wearing a Rolex watch lately? Jason asked. She nodded her head. Yes, she said. He said it was a gift from management. Jason shook his head and pulled a card from Karen's nightstand. He opened it and showed it to her. She read the note and cried. Is this his handwriting? Jason asked. Yes, she replied, sobbing. That's not all, he said, pulling out the emails and the audio recorder. She read the emails, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then he turned on the audio recording from Friday. I'm sorry for all of this, he said, hugging her. He wanted to cry too, but he held back. It's not your fault, she said. I suspected something like this a long time ago, but I had no proof. After a while, she pulled herself together and looked at him. So what are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to divorce her, he said. Are you? Say it. I'm going to throw that rat bastard out of the house as soon as I see him, she said. Suddenly, she stopped crying and looked at him. I have an idea, she said. What is it? He asked. They want to live here together. Why don't we help them? She asked. What do you mean? He asked. I mean, why don't we pack up their things and bring them here? She replied. Jason thought for a moment and smiled at her. I like that idea, he said. But we'd better hurry. They'll be back in a day or two. She shook her head. Greg said he'd be gone for a week after the convention, she said. I'll bet you anything she'll find an excuse to leave, too. Jason suddenly remembered the recorded conversation. Karen had specifically asked him if he had everything ready for next week, but hadn't specified exactly what they were planning. Shit, he said. You're probably right. But I still want her shit out of my house as soon as possible. I agree, she said. Meet me back here in, say, 3 hours? Works for me, he said. I'll just throw her shit in the trash bag, so I think I can do that and be back here in 3 hours. See you then, she said, standing up. Jason looked at her intently. She was shorter than Karen in height, and her slender figure was complemented by her cuteness. He thought Greg was a damn idiot for cheating on this woman. They left the condo and arrived about 3 hours later, their cars loaded with bags of the couple's belongings. They carried the bags into the condo and tossed them into the nearly empty second bedroom, not caring that anything might break. They knew it would take the cheating spouses several hours to sort everything out. I don't know about you, but I didn't care much for his stuff, she said. He laughed. Me neither, Jason said. They laughed and did a high five. He looked at her. I don't know about you, but I'm hungry, he said. Me too, she replied. I could use a nice juicy hamburger. A big fat cheeseburger sounds good too, he said. I know just the right place. Would you like to join me? My treat. Drive, she said. He drove toward the bar he and Ron liked to visit, and she followed. When they parked, Christy looked up at the front of the building. A bar? She asked. Trust me, he said. They make the best burgers here. You'll love it. Good, she said. I hope you're not going to pour me alcohol and take advantage of me. He laughed. As tempting as that sounds, I wouldn't do that to you, he said. Hell, she said, laughing. They went inside and ordered a beer, a burger, and fries. Over their meals, they exchanged stories about their failed marriages. Her story was similar to his. She met him in college and they soon married. Only she wanted kids and he didn't. He started working for Acme Real Estate and she took a job with a home remodeling company and worked in accounts receivable. You're a CPA? He asked. She shook her head. No, I've never gotten that far, but I was hoping to do it someday, she said. He told her about his background and work. We're always looking for a good man, he said. Maybe if you give me a resume, we can help each other out. I can just about do that, Mr. Chandler, she said, taking a bite out of her burger. At that moment, his cell phone rang. He saw that it was Karen's phone and answered it. Hi, he said in a neutral tone. Hey, babe, Karen replied. It was obvious she had been drinking. What are you doing? Just stopped by the bar to grab a hamburger, he replied. What's wrong with you? Guess what? She asked. I won the Best Salesperson Award, she said without waiting for his answer. I'm happy for you, he said. Yeah, and they want me to stay here in Vegas next week to work with their agents, she said. Of course, he already knew that was a lie. Isn't that wonderful? There's talk that I might be promoted to manager soon. No doubt at her suggestion, he thought to himself. That's wonderful, he said. What about our anniversary? It's coming up this Wednesday. I know, she said, and I'm sorry about that. Maybe we can celebrate it next weekend. Don't worry, he said. I know your work is important to you and I wouldn't want you to miss the big sale. What does that mean? She asked. Nothing, he said. It's just that 10 years of marriage can only be celebrated once. But I realize how much your work means to you. Don't worry about it. Yes, my job is important to me, but I thought you might be happy for me, she said. I'm very happy, he told her. Go work with your agents. Don't worry about me. I love you, she said. Good, he told her. I do too. Bye? With those words, he ended the conversation and looked at Christy. So that's it, he told her. She shook her head. She really chose Greg over your anniversary, Christy said, putting her hand over his. He almost cried. A man he'd barely met was more concerned about him than his own wife. What a bitch. I'm sorry. Thanks, he said, trying to smile. He pulled out Jerry's card and dialed his private number. Jerry, he said when the older man answered. Jason Chandler here. I just got off the phone with Karen, and she said she'll be in Vegas for another week. And I take it you don't believe her? Jerry asked. Not for a minute, Jason replied. Nev, I was just working on your report, but I can have my guys watch them and see what they do, he said. We can move on. I heard the conference ended a couple hours ago, and they're having a lot of fun right now. Almost everyone will be going home tomorrow. By the way, your wife and her lover spent the night together last night. I have a video that I think you might be interested in. I'll email it to you if you'd like. It'll all be in my report. That would be great, Jerry, Jason said. Thanks. He ended the conversation and looked at Christy. Well, tomorrow, we'll find out what's really going on, he said. These two lovebirds spent the night together. My private investigator is going to email me the videotapes. Would you like to watch it with me? Not really, she replied. But I feel like I should. He nodded his head understandingly. Well, let's go to my house then, he said as he stood up. After Jason paid for their food, they left the bar and headed toward his house. By the time they got to the house and settled into his office, a video had arrived on his email. Do you want something to drink before watching it? He asked. Sure, she replied. Coca-Cola, if you have it. I'll get a Coca-Cola right away, he said, and went into the kitchen. He came back with 2 cold Coca-Colas and held one out to her. He turned on a video and they watched Karen and Greg having various types of sex. Both Christy and Jason held back tears as they watched their spouses having fun with each other. Even more devastating was the pillow talk that followed. What do you think our spouses are doing right now? Karen asked. Karen asked. If I know Christy, she's probably watching one of her boring movies, Greg said, or reading one of her stupid books. Yeah, I know what you mean, she said. And Jason's probably playing with another one of his stupid spreadsheets or looking at stock market reports. Greg grinned. You'd think he was saving the world or something. Christ, his dad's company sells tires, for crying out loud. What the hell's so damn important about that? So have you figured out what you're going to tell that asshole after the awards banquet tomorrow? Greg asked. Yeah, she replied. I'll just tell him I was asked to stay in Vegas for a week to fill in for the local reps. He'll believe it. Hell, he'll believe anything I tell him. I can tell him the moon is made of green cheese and he'll agree. And by the time he realizes it, we'll be on a beach in Hawaii, he said. I can't wait to see you in that new sling bikini you bought. Christy went into a frenzy. Hawaii? She shouted. That bastard's taking some whore to Hawaii? I'm gonna rip his balls off. She looked at Jason. I apologize for calling your wife a whore. You shouldn't, he said. I would have called her the same thing. They went back to the video. So, Greg continued, what about your anniversary? Are you just going to skip it? Hawaii sounds a lot more interesting to me than a night at a steakhouse, she said. I promised to make it up to him. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. Greg looked at her. You're cold, you know that? He asked. She shrugged. It's only our 10th anniversary, she said. There'll be more. Who cares about that? I need you right now. With those words, they started having fun again, causing Jason to stop the video. I've seen enough, Jason said. Have you? Christy nodded her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. More than enough, she said. I'm scheduling an appointment with a divorce attorney for Monday, he said. Would you like to join me? Is that okay with you? She asked quietly. Not at all, he told her. Christy burst into tears, sobbing. Jason put his arm around her and let her cry on his shoulder. He wanted to cry too, but he decided to hold back. He comforted her as best he could, fighting his own emotions. Do you mind if I stay with you tonight? She asked. No sex, I just want to be cuddled. Sure, you can stay, he said. Stay for a week if you want. Thanks, she said. I can't believe I've been giving myself to that asshole all these years. All this time, I've been falling for his bullshit. I know exactly what you mean, Jason said. He led her upstairs to the bedroom and found an old t-shirt that seemed long enough for her to wear to bed. She took it and went into the bathroom to change. After waiting for her to return, he changed into his pajamas and climbed into bed. She came out of the bathroom wearing a long t-shirt, and he almost gasped when he saw her. He'd always thought Karen's legs looked good, but Christy's legs were the slimmest he'd ever seen. She smiled, climbing under the covers. What's the matter? She asked. Haven't you ever seen a woman's legs before? None look as good as yours, Jason said. Flattery will get you everywhere, sir, she teased. He wrapped his arm around her and pulled her to him, inhaling her scent. She put her hand on his chest and pressed herself against him. Do you know you're the only woman, besides my wife, that I've been in bed with for over a decade? He asked. And you're the only man I've been with besides my husband, she replied. They looked into each other's faces for what seemed like an eternity. And that's how they fell asleep and woke up the next morning pressed against each other. Good morning, sleepyhead, she said. You don't need to move at my expense, she added as he got up to go to the bathroom. Good morning, beautiful, he told her. I'll be right back. He went into the bathroom and peed, which was quite difficult considering the state of his manhood. By the time he came out, Christy had already cleaned up the kitchen and was making everyone portions of scrambled eggs and bacon. Glancing at the clock on the wall, he saw that it was 8:30 in the morning. His attention shifted back to Christy. He loved watching her cook in his old t-shirt, and for a moment he remembered those happy times when Karen made breakfast for them every morning. Damn, that smells good, he said. I hope you don't mind me treating myself in your kitchen, she said. Not at all, he answered her. I can't remember the last time someone made me breakfast. Karen never cooked for you? She asked. She used to cook at first, he said. But she stopped making breakfast a long time ago, said it took up too much time and she had clients to clean up after. Bitch, Christy muttered. Agreed, he said. He smelled bacon as she set a large plate in front of him. He devoured the food like a man who hadn't eaten in a month. Damn, that was really good. Do you cook like that every morning? When I can, she replied. Jason's cell phone rang. Glancing at the screen, he saw Jerry's name and number and answered. Good morning, Jerry, he said. Are you working on Sundays now? Jerry laughed. More often than I'd like, he replied. I just wanted to let you know that your wife and her lover boarded their flight in Las Vegas at 6 o'clock this morning. They had a 40-minute layover at the Los Angeles airport, and the plane left there about an hour ago. They will land in Honolulu in about 5 hours. I have the flight information if you need it. Yes, Jason said. They're on American Airlines Flight 31, Jerry said. I have a man in Honolulu ready to pick up their trail when they get there. Thanks, Jerry, Jason said, writing down the information. He ended the conversation and looked at Christy again. Okay, he said. That's it. They're flying to Hawaii. After the plane took off, Karen sat back in her seat. She looked out the window and watched the plane whiz over the Pacific Ocean. This is it, she thought to herself. Looking to her left, she saw that Greg was already sound asleep in the seat next to her. She closed her eyes for a moment and thought about the last 10 years. For a moment, she was overcome with guilt for what she was doing to her husband, who had foolishly trusted her. In her hind mind, she realized that this was just the latest in a string of poor decisions on her part. But, she reasoned, it was her duty to herself. Eventually, she thought, it would end without Jason finding out. Her marriage would continue, and eventually they would retire and grow old together. Her first bad decision was to tell Jason that she couldn't get pregnant. In fact, she could, but she just didn't want to tie herself into the bond of marriage with children. The idea of motherhood might appeal to some, but not to her. So she told Jason that due to medical complications, she had to have her tubes tied. He accepted her explanation and eventually agreed. But she developed problems with the IUD and had to stop using it. The pelvic pain and headaches eventually became too much for her, and she decided to use standard birth control pills. She also started using the calendar rhythm method and avoided sex on her most fertile days. This helped most of the time, but she ended up getting pregnant anyway, twice. The first time was by her husband. Fearing his reaction to the pregnancy, which would expose her first lie, and her own desire to remain childless, she discreetly had an abortion, paying for it out of her own money. Fortunately, they had agreed from the beginning to set up personal accounts as well as a joint account. They had originally agreed to put 10% of her net pay into the account, but she turned out to be very sneaky. She could pay for the abortion out of her own money and Jason would be left in the dark. Her second pregnancy was with Greg about 6 months ago. She told her lover about it and made the decision to have another abortion, again paying for it out of her own money. She hoped Jason would never find out about it. And then there were her affairs. For the first 7 years of their marriage, she was faithful to her husband, but that all changed one day when she met a client who turned out to be very handsome and wealthy. It was a decision made in the blink of an eye, but one she never regretted. They made mad, passionate love in the bedroom of a large house she was showing, and he expressed his appreciation by buying the house. She didn't do it often, maybe 10 times in a year and a half, but she later learned that others had done it as well. Sure, she felt a little guilty, but, she decided, what the hell? If other girls could do it and get away with it, so could she. Jason, in her opinion, had nothing to do with it. She'd never stopped loving him, and what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. Then she'd met Greg, and everything had changed. He was everything her husband wasn't. Jason liked to analyze everything before making a decision, while Greg was spontaneous and made decisions instantly. Jason's life and career had been set long ago. He had worked for his father all his life and still does to this day. He would soon become the CFO of his father's tire company and one day serve as president and CEO. Greg, on the other hand, didn't know where he would end up in 5 years and saw everything as one day at a time. While Jason was thinking about the future, Greg was living in the moment. They were very different in bed, too. While Jason would make love to her and concentrate on pleasing her, Greg would just take and destroy her. At first, they met at motels and hotels around town or at the house they were selling, but she became concerned that someone might spot them and alert Jason or Greg's wife, Christy. Then there was the night Jason expressed concern that they were drifting apart. She freaked out and grew cold toward Greg for a while. She directed all her love toward her husband, but it didn't last long. Greg wanted to start over, but she was afraid Jason would find out about them. She needed to figure something out, so she decided to buy her own apartment. That way, she and Greg would have a special place. He wanted to entertain her in the bed she shared with her husband, but she refused. Even though Jason seemed like something of a stick in the mud, she still had some feelings for him. It helped that she and Jason had long ago decided to file their tax returns separately. She could leave the apartment to him and still get a tax break. It was a win-win. At least that's what she told herself. All of this led to her deciding to spend a week in Hawaii with Greg. She took a week's vacation from the office, saying she would go to Hawaii with her husband after the annual corporate meeting. Greg, meanwhile, informed his wife that he would be traveling all next week, which was not uncommon for him. She'd lied to Jason, saying she'd be in Vegas for a whole week. Of course, a couple phone calls would have been enough, and he would have figured it out. Lucky for her, she thought, Jason believed everything she told him. The only downside was that she'd miss her 10th wedding anniversary with Jason. But she would make it up to him as soon as she got back, and it would all remain her secret. She smiled as she looked at the blue water below them and thought of Hawaii. Greg had bought a very risque open bikini for the trip. He wanted to watch her take it off and masturbate on the beach for him. The thought made her wet between her legs, and she fought the urge to rub herself with her fingers right on the seat. Maybe she'll go to the bathroom and set herself up later, she thought. Nah, baby. She pulled out her phone and checked to see if there were any messages or calls. She wasn't surprised to see that Jason hadn't texted or emailed her. He didn't like texting and preferred to communicate by phone or in person. She grinned to herself. She felt the plane shudder and thought that maybe they had hit turbulence. She felt the plane lower its nose and the engine sounded different. She realized something was terribly wrong when she looked out the window. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the cabin and she felt gravity pushing her into her seat. Looking out, she realized they were falling downward. Oh my God, she thought to herself. This is it. We're going to crash. I'm going to die. The oxygen masks were suddenly lowered, and she heard the screams of the other passengers, including Greg, as the flight attendants tried to prepare them for the inevitable. She looked at her phone and, smearing tears down her face, made one last decision. And Jason and Christy finished breakfast and put away the last of the dishes. They sat down at the table again and began discussing plans on how to deal with their wayward spouses. Jason was impressed with Christy's ability to analyze the problem. He felt closer to her at that moment than he had felt to Karen for months. He was just returning to the table with a second cup of coffee for them when his phone buzzed. Karen's name and number popped up on the screen and he put it on speaker. "Hello?" he asked. "Jace," he heard Karen yell. It was hard to hear as there were a lot of extraneous noises around and other people's screams could be heard. "Yeah, Karen, what's going on?" Or he asked. "It's not time. Airplane. Down. Sorry. Pardon. Me," they heard before the call was abruptly cut off. Jason and Christy looked at each other in shock. Jason tried to call Karen back, but the call went straight to voicemail. He looked at Christy. "Try calling Greg," he told her. She ran to the front room and grabbed her phone from her purse. While he watched her, she tried to make the call but shook her head. "It went straight to voicemail," she said. He made his way to his home office and turned on his computer. Starting it up, he typed the airline's contact number into the search engine. He called and was turned down, but eventually he was able to speak to someone who confirmed that they were investigating reports of a downed airplane. He left his name and phone number and Karen and Greg's details and was told he would be contacted. He also left Christy's details so she could be contacted. He did a quick Google search, but nothing came up. He figured it would be at least an hour before there was any news. They walked to the front room and turned on the TV, wondering if anything had appeared. Jason went from channel to channel, but nothing reported. He looked at his phone and thought about the events leading up to this moment. Finally, a news network reported that an American Airlines flight to Honolulu had crashed in the Pacific, but there were no details. "Oh my God," Christy said, covering her mouth with her hand. Jason hugged her and silently prayed that Karen was alive. He hated what she had done to their marriage, but He didn't want her to die. An hour later, the phone rang. He turned off the TV and answered the call. "Mr. Chandler?" a woman asked. "It's him," he said. "I just wanted to contact you and confirm that your wife's flight has crashed," she said. "I don't have any further information at this time, but we'll get back to you as soon as we have more information." "Thank you," Jason said, ending the conversation. He and Christy hugged and shed a few tears. A few minutes later, Christy's phone rang and she was given the same information. A short time later, his father called. This wasn't unusual. His parents often called him when they heard something like this on the news. "Hey, Jace," his dad said. "Hey, Dad, how's it going?" he asked. "And I just got back from church. Did you see the news about that accident?" his father asked him. "Yes, I did," Jason replied. "That's terrible," said his father. "By the way, how is Karen doing? Isn't she on her way back from Vegas?" "She's not doing so well right now, Dad," Jason said. "She was on that airplane that crashed." "What?" his father asked, shocked. "What was she doing going to Hawaii without you?" "She was with her boyfriend," Jason said. "Oh my God," the older man said. "I'm sorry to hear that, son. Look, take a week off and get things straightened out. I'll let Mike know. If there's anything we can do, just give me a call, okay?" "Thanks, Dad," Jason said. He ended the conversation, his mind overflowing with conflicting emotions. On the one hand, he was saddened that Karen was, in all likelihood, dead. On the other hand, he was angry at her for cheating on him. And he was also angry at himself for not being able to stand up to her. But strangely enough, he wasn't upset by the fact that her death meant no divorce. Then, another thought occurred to him. He would have to pay for all of her final expenses, including the apartment. Shit, he thought to himself. He looked at Christy and wondered how she would feel about all this. What would she do? A thought occurred to him and he walked over to her. "Christy," he said, "why don't you sell your apartment and move in with me?" She raised tear-filled eyes to him. "Are you serious?" she asked. "Yes, seriously," he said. "I have another bedroom upstairs, and you're going to be going through a lot in the next few months. Maybe we can help each other get through it." She thought for a moment before answering. "Why not?" she said, "but only on one condition." "And what's that?" he asked. "You let me sleep with you," she said. "Really?" Jason asked. Things were happening much faster than he thought they would, and he wondered if that was wise. He dismissed the thought and decided to throw caution to the wind. "Yes," she said. "It's been a long time since I felt truly comfortable with my husband. Last night I felt content for the first time in years. Are you okay with that?" "More than okay with it," he said. "Good," she said. "Then I'll run to the house to get my things and be back by tonight." Jason nodded his head. "I'll be here," he said. When she left, he called Lucy, the woman who ran the office where Karen usually worked. "Hello," she said, picking up the phone. "Lucy, this is Jason Chandler," he said. "Oh, hi, Jason," she said. "How did it go in Hawaii?" "I don't know," he said. "I hear it's nice here this time of year. Why?" "Well, Karen said you two were going there after the company meeting," Lucy said. "I figured you two were on your way." "No," Jason said. "She went to Hawaii, but not with me. She went with Greg." "What?" Lucy asked, shocked. "That's right," said Jason. "But it didn't work out for her. And neither did he. The plane they were flying on went down in the Pacific Ocean today. You may have seen it on the news." "Oh no," Lucy said. "Do you know if she managed to make it out?" "I don't think either of them survived the accident," he said. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Please accept my condolences. And thank you for letting me know. I don't know if you know this, but the company carries life insurance on all of its employees. I'll do the paperwork first thing, but I need something from the airline. Can you get that to me?" "Yes, I'll get what I can," he said. "But I have a question for you." "What is it?" Lucy asked. "Did you know Karen was having an affair with Greg?" he asked. "I suspected something was going on. There were rumors, but nothing more than that," said Lucy. "We don't usually gossip about such things in the office." "I see," he said. "Well, that's all I've got. I'll be in touch." "Thank you," she said. "And again, my condolences." "I appreciate that," Jason said, and ended the conversation. That night, as he and Christy watched television, it showed a report on the disaster. According to the report, The last moments of the plane's flight had been captured by a crew member aboard a cargo airliner that was only a couple miles from the crash site. The TV station showed the amateur video, which clearly shows the plane rapidly falling nose first. It appeared as if the plane was literally falling apart as it hit the water. The report said the freighter changed course to see if they could find any survivors. They pulled several bodies out of the water, but there were no survivors. They also lifted a lot of luggage, including Karen and Greg's belongings. Karen and Greg's bodies were not found. Epilogue. The next few months were hectic for Jason and Christy. She moved in with Jason and sold her house. Jason had a lot of things to deal with, including Karen's apartment. It didn't have anything he needed, so he gave everything to Goodwill, who was more than happy to take it. He eventually sold the apartment, getting back the amount Karen had paid for it. Both he and Christy received a $500,000 insurance check from Acme Real Estate in the event of the couple's death. Christy moved in with Jason, and they immediately began banishing all traces of Karen. Photos were thrown out, knickknacks were put away, and furniture, especially the bed, was replaced. Jason let the family members take what they wanted. The rest, including the 2 cars, were either sold, burned, given to Goodwill, or scrapped. Jason also had to sweat to sort out Karen's bank accounts. After months and mountains of paperwork, he received a check for about $250,000. Lawyers pounced on Jason and Christy, eager to cash in on the accident. Further investigation revealed that the crew misunderstood the onboard computer warnings and took the wrong actions. The plane was falling at about 12,000 feet per minute and hit the water at about 135 miles per hour, meaning it took just over 3 minutes to crash into the ocean. Karen's last 3 minutes, some of which she had spent talking to him on the phone, must have been a living hell, he thought. There was a sense of remorse in her last actions, no doubt brought on by the realization that she was falling toward her death, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. And yet, he thought, it was too little and too late. Fortunately, the airline had reached a settlement with all of the affected families, paying each passenger a little over $175,000. Jason and Christy made just over $1.6 million after everything was accounted for. Of course, the IRS got their share, but they were left with a pretty decent fortune in the end. Since Karen and Greg's remains were never found, no funeral was needed, but Jason and Christy held memorial services mostly for their families. Neither of them shed a tear for their deceased spouses. After 3 months of service, Christy left her job and moved in with Jason. By then, they were madly in love with each other. One night, while they were having dinner at a local Texas Roadhouse restaurant, Jason got down on one knee and proposed. Christy squealed with delight, and those around them applauded. "It's time to make an honest woman of me," she whispered in his ear. "Why?" he asked. "Because you're going to be a daddy," she replied. He covered her face with kisses. "I love you so much," he told her. "I love you even more," she replied. "Just one favor." "What's that?" he asked. "Please don't ask me to fly anywhere," she said. He laughed, hugging her tightly. "Don't worry, darling," he said. "Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video."